Hi, this is Steve Pleich, and welcome back to Voice Smooth Village. This is the second installment of our show on progressive candidates here in Santa Cruz, and we're really happy to have a good friend, Kelsey. Hello, Kelsey, welcome. Kelsey, as you can see, we are here in the conference room of CTV. We're observing the COVID-19 protocols, we're social distancing, you have your mask on. Tell people a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in public life and putting yourself up to be a candidate, and kind of the challenges of campaigning in the COVID-19 era.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm a progressive organizer in Santa Cruz. I've lived here for close to a decade now. I'm a UCSC alumna, and so going to school here kind of was the first dive into local politics. I did a lot of organizing around housing justice, climate issues. I sat on the UNA board with you.
Absolutely.
And I started kind of getting involved in the progressive scene, and I was really inspired by the Compassionate Core here in Santa Cruz that cares for one another. And I also work at the Romero Institute, which is a 501c3 nonprofit devoted to social justice and indigenous sovereignty issues. And so basically now in this weird time that we're in 2020, it was really important for me to enter public life, and I also was called upon by a certain contingent of this community asking for bolder voices in city politics, especially after the recall and the undemocratic, divisive experience that we just had here in Santa Cruz. People asked, we need leaders that will step up in this time in a very unusual campaign circuit to lead us forward in these treacherous waters. And I rolled up my sleeves and I was like, okay, let's do it. And I'm really excited despite the challenges ahead in COVID, because I think that we are in a current moment where people are really hungry for issues and for solutions to the problems that we're experiencing now. In coronavirus, we're seeing, as well as the wildfires, we are seeing the fact that social inequities that we're already experiencing in our society are deeply compounded by both the pandemic and by natural disasters and climate-related emergencies like the wildfire. And so moving forward, I want to use my experience as an organizer, my values as a progressive organizer specifically, and my passion for this community to see us through the challenges ahead with integrity and with resolve.
And a wonderful progressive credentials working with Danny Sheehan, Sarah Nelson at the Romero Institute, two of my heroes, and of course my pleasure to have worked with you on the UNA board. As a practical matter, when you are elected and take office in December, next year you're going to have to grapple with a budget that, as you know, is unbalanced. We're looking at, even before the COVID-19 challenges economically, we were looking at an unbalanced city budget. What are your ideas about reviving the city budget, trying to balance a little bit of the budget deficits that we have, while still maintaining essential services like parks and recreation and public works and those kinds of things, which is going to be your responsibility.
And that's one of the biggest questions on the table, I think, for anyone that's running for elected office anywhere in the country. But in Santa Cruz, we're specifically hurt hard because we are a hospitality industry. We're a place that relies heavily on tourism and things that cannot be socially distanced properly. And so in moving forward with the budget, I am committed to making sure that we don't balance the budget on the backs of workers and making sure that budgetary bloat is the first thing to be chopped. And so, on day one, I would ask staff to hand me a list of salaries that are over $150,000 on the city government level. Additionally, I think that in the coming crisis and the coming recovery period, we cannot afford to cut from our social safety net. Because as we saw in the 2008 financial crisis, my parents were evicted in the 2008 financial crisis, and I witnessed firsthand that when we chop our social services, it doubly impacts the people that were already being impacted by an economic recession, by the social inequities that get deepened and the gap that gets widened during a crisis on the national, local, or state level. And so I would want to make sure that, A, workers who are being impacted by any cuts that happen are at the table and they have the ability to bargain for what is rightfully theirs. And then 2, that we have, we cut with compassion. You know, budget cuts are never easy. They're never going to be simple to make, so that in looking in the short and long term, we ensure that the people who are most vulnerable to crisis are being considered when we make those cuts.
And I think that's a great segue into the next issue, and that is houselessness rather. We understand that they are the most vulnerable in our city. We have a very large homeless population, larger than any other homeless population in the city or county, in Watsonville. And yet we want to be compassionate about helping people as we can. What are your ideas about response to houselessness, and how can we really help people bring them out of houselessness, perhaps into something a little more stable, like permanent or transitional supportive housing?
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate this question. So as I mentioned, my family was evicted in 2008, and I actually dealt with housing insecurity for about 5 years. Santa Cruz was actually one of the first places that I lived where I had secure housing, which is not a typical story for somebody growing up poor in Santa Cruz. But in my platform, things that I prioritize around housing is, 1, affordable housing, so making sure that people can afford to live here for moderate, low, and very low income levels. And then additionally, I would like to see budget reallocations go specifically toward our shelter capacity, because right now, as you mentioned, we have such a huge housing or houseless population, and we do not have the capacity to adequately shelter them. Thirdly, I am supportive of transitional camps. I think that we have to do more as a city government to instill a sense of compassion in our populace and ensure that people have a roof over their head, especially in a pandemic. I want to emphasize that whether that roof is a physical structure or it's a tent, we need to make sure that people have the ability to adequately shelter in place. And then thirdly, some research that I've been doing in other communities and places across the country of how they're handling housing insecurity are more long-term solutions that focus on transitional housing, like tiny home villages. One particular example that I was really excited by was CHAD, which is the Chico Housing Action Directive or something like that. And they're a very similar allegory to us in the sense that they have a large houseless population, but they also are recovering from the campfire. They're still in the recovery period from the campfire, and they had a lot of wildfire refugees. And so they got the green light from their city council to move forward with the tiny house project. And they're bringing together nonprofit developers as well as private donations and people in the community that are interested in working on it. And I would like to see the city government put more creative thinking into long-term solutions like that.
Excellent. I think those are very, very good ideas. And of course, as somebody who professionally works as a shelter coordinator and has written and spoken out about transitional encampments, I hardly agree that those are kinds of the things, the policies, the programs that we really do need. Let's shift a little bit into public safety. In past campaigns in Santa Cruz, the mantra really has been affordable housing, and people have been talking a lot about that. But years ago, the mantra was really public safety. And now, with the advent of Black Lives Matter and the things that have, all the tragedies that have happened, the inequities and the implicit bias that we see so much in our systemically now, policing, I think, has to change. What's your idea about how we are policed here in Santa Cruz, and what we need to really provide fair, comprehensive, unbiased, and racially equitable policing?
Yeah, I'm very pleased to answer this question. It's something that's really close to my heart. So I've been doing allyship work with the Black Lives Matter movement since Ferguson happened, and I think that it is important that Santa Cruz really take this moment seriously. And being a progressive city, I believe that we really need to push the fold here in our own community. In terms of how I feel about our policing, public safety and community safety is something that everybody wants, regardless of where they lie on the political spectrum. But I don't believe that we need a budget of $30 million to keep a community of our size safe. Additionally, as we know, most of that budget is going to patrolling, which is just moving houseless people around. And the mass policing of our most vulnerable community members is not making us safe. When a police officer confiscates the tent and belongings of somebody in the benchlands, that does not make me safer. And so I would like to see a reallocation of budget items that divert the problems that the police themselves have admitted they don't want to be having to deal with. So in reference to personal crises of mental health or substance abuse, I would like to see a cahoots-like model implemented here in Santa Cruz. There's a lot of work happening in our community already, and I think that city government needs to listen to the energy of the people who are mobilizing on this issue. You know, only 15% of the 911 calls that come into Santa Cruz, or the Santa Cruz 911 dispatch, are for violent offenses. And there's definitely a role, I think, for the police in investigating violent offenses, in keeping people safe in that capacity. But I think that we have the ability to follow the charge of similar cities around the country in creating alternative systems of safety that will actually address the root causes of the systemic inequities that cause crime and mental health crises in the first place.
And of course, as you know, this last year, a model surveillance ordinance came before the council, and they did vote to not invest any more money or have any more policies about predictive policing and facial recognition technology. As a member of the ACLU board, we certainly would like to push that farther and really address more privacy issues. Would you be willing to look at a more comprehensive model surveillance ordinance when you sit as council member this fall and next year?
Yeah, absolutely. And that also touches on another point that I'm really passionate about of, you know, in showing that we take the Black Lives Matter movement seriously, that we take the issue of over-policing seriously. We need to also address the systems that cause over-policing. We need to address those before problems happen in our society. So for instance, I would like to see a preventative ban on tear gas, rubber bullets, the LRAD, and I'd like to see the Bearcat sold.
Wonderful. Well, as somebody who fought as hard as humanly possible, among other folks, to make sure the Bearcat didn't come into town unsuccessfully, we'd certainly like to see it exit town as soon as possible. One of the things that we haven't touched on, and you were certainly a very strong advocate for, the climate.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your thoughts about climate here in Santa Cruz and how we can make ourselves a more environmentally safe and sound community.
Yeah, so I was at Standing Rock. I stood against the Dakota Access Pipeline with indigenous communities. I've done the climate strike here locally, and I'm really invested in making sure that our grassroots energy all over the country and in our community for environmental solutions and climate justice gets put into the institutions of our city government. And we have a lot of environmental leadership already, and I think it's important to give kudos where it's due. We've led on so many things around greening our city, renewable energy, but there's still more work to do. And one particular place that I would like to improve is to give our climate action plan more teeth, to see those goals actually implemented and actually abided by. Additionally, you know, even though we are a climate-forward city, even though our electorate is very concerned about the environment, we just faced one of the most disastrous wildfires in the country, and climate crisis is at our door. My hometown is on fire. Santa Cruz is on fire. I've lived in 2 different places in California. They're 450 miles apart, and they're both on fire right now. And so I think that we need to build resilience as well as try to prevent climate change by reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. And you know, the clock is ticking, the science is here. We need to act boldly and do not just what is politically feasible, but what is necessary.
And as someone who has been consistently critical of our climate action plan since its acceptance, I view it as a 204-item wish list. To put more teeth in it, to do some of the things that you were mentioning earlier about working with the Romero Institute and Danny Sheehan and Sarah Nelson and the Green New Deal, do you think that there is an opportunity in Santa Cruz to really push that forward as a community?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, our climate action planner is only one person. There's only so much community engagement that you can do when you are only putting, you know, a budget of less than $200,000 to the biggest existential threat that our seaside and well-forested community is facing. Additionally, there's a lot of things like, you know, municipal composting, you know, water, saltwater intrusion, recovery issues. Like, there's so many things that we should be doing as a community that could be emboldened by taking more serious strides toward climate action. Additionally, I really would like to see that the vulnerable communities, particularly in the mountains and in the beach flats, have a bigger say at the table, because they're going to be the first people that are they already are being impacted by climate crisis.
Well, I think it's important to have a very strong voice for the climate. I think amongst the candidates, folks have ideas about how they want to make their community safer, more affordable, revive it in so many different ways. But climate, I think, is at the core.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just in the way that we view everything through a fiscal lens. When we have voting matters on the dais and we say, how does this impact the bottom line, we should be looking at every single issue and how it impacts our climate values and how it promotes or does not promote environmental justice in our community.
Well, we've got about a minute or so left. Tell folks why they should be voting for Kelsey Hill and why you would be an excellent representative for them on our city council.
Well, thanks so much. Business as usual is clearly not working in Santa Cruz. As we can see now, the status quo is upholding profit over the value of human life. And we need bolder leadership on that dais. We need people who actually stand up to large-scale corporate interests. We need people who will stand up for the people that are struggling to get by in this pandemic and the people that are not sleeping in a shelter right now. So I ask for your vote because I can promise you that I am an empathetic, compassionate member of this community, and I will work hard to see that our values are centered in every decision that I make. So if you want to learn more about me, you can go to kelseyhill4council.com, or you can shoot me an email at kelseyhill4council@gmail.com. My door is always open for folks, and I'd like to talk about the issues that are impacting you or your community.
Kelsey, thanks for being here with us. Kelsey Hill, candidate for Santa Cruz City Council. I've been Steve Pleich on the second installment of our City Council candidates discussions on Voices from the Village, and we'll talk to you then.